thousands of people with nothing to eat. Come and see what Jesus does. As today's episode opens, Jesus' disciples are returning to debrief from their mission. Jesus had sent them to proclaim news in the surrounding villages that the kingdom of God was coming, that God was on his way. Now, as they return, Jesus goes to a remote place with these friends. He wants to give them rest and a chance to tell their stories. If the disciples were expecting prolonged downtime, they were about to be disappointed. The crowds track Jesus down, maybe intrigued by the news that God himself is coming. We might imagine that Jesus would have been dismayed by the interruption, but Luke says he welcomed the crowds. He spoke to them about the kingdom of God. He healed those who needed healing, giving them further proof that God really did want to break into their life stories. Clearly, serving the crowds in this way took Jesus a long time. It was a big job. And as all this took place, if they're anything like me, the disciples probably thought they'd done well in managing the people and their time. They didn't chase away the crowds, for example. Well, at least not at first. They waited until late afternoon before approaching Jesus. By this point, perhaps they were concerned for the crowds, or maybe they just wanted their own time with Jesus. Either way, they now forcefully tell Jesus that the crowds need to go home. Send the crowd away so that they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we are in a remote place. The disciples' words were true. The crowds really did need to be fed and to get home safely. The disciples' solution is to send the crowds away, to get them to sort out their own problems. But that is not Jesus' way. Instead, he says something remarkable. You give them something to eat. Now, clearly, the disciples have no way of feeding a crowd this size. There are 5,000 men alone. And a quick whip around reveals that they can only source 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, barely enough to feed a single family. Yet in the disciples' inability to meet the need, Jesus provides the solution. Jesus has the disciples organize the crowd into groups of 50 or so, probably to facilitate distribution. Then he takes the loaves and the fish, looks up to heaven, gives thanks, and breaks them up to be shared around. The disciples bring the food to the group sat on the ground. And then everyone, men, women, and children, eats. And they are all satisfied. Some of us are so familiar with the story that its wonder is lost on us. So let's realize this should not have happened. You do not normally feed this number of bellies with a packed lunch for one. Yes, we have questions. Did each disciple start with only a tiny bit of bread and a smidgen of fish? And as the food was passed around each group, did people find that no matter how much bread they ripped off, the roll didn't get smaller? Luke doesn't explain exactly how Jesus multiplied the food. One thing we do know, somewhere along the way, the food ends up increasing, since the volume of leftovers far exceeds the amount that Jesus started with. In fact, if we let it, this story should disturb us. What sort of person is able to multiply physical matter in this way? It's little wonder that miracles like this have forced people from around the world and across time to consider the question, who is this man? And here's the shocking answer. Jesus is going around acting and catering as if he is the living God. The Jewish Bible opens with the book of Genesis, where God speaks creation into existence. And now we see Jesus creating new matter where it did not exist before. And as he looks up to heaven and gives thanks, Jesus reminds us that the physical world is good. The food that we eat each day reminds us of this reality. I mean, after all, God didn't give us fuel sticks to insert into our sides like batteries. He delighted to give us bread and fish, Black Forest gato, mangoes, laksa, and roast beef with all the trimmings. Doesn't Jesus remind us of this God who loves to fill stomachs? And as the disciples watched Jesus provide bread in the wilderness, they were probably also reminded of God's miraculous provision for his people in one of the epic events of their nation's history. As Moses led God's people, the living God rained down manna to sustain his people as they looked death in the eye. And now Jesus is nourishing his people and providing them with life once again. And that very commitment to giving his people life led Jesus not just to welcome them and feed them, but die for them. In fact, what Jesus does to the bread is a picture of what would happen to his own body. Jesus himself is the one who was lifted up. He gave thanks, allowing his body to be broken and given out for others. Jesus is the God who not only feeds hungry people in the wilderness, but who feeds us today with all we need to have life forever with him. Elsewhere, the Bible pictures what the kingdom of God will be like when it comes in its physical fullness. It will be like a banquet, a feast, where we enjoy the best foods and the finest wines, where everyone is welcome, and where death is swallowed up forever. As he feeds the 5,000, Jesus gives us a foretaste of this banquet, which he generously, lavishly, sacrificially paid for himself at the cost of his own life. What might it look like to be part of a CU shaped by this story? Let's enjoy every mouthful. Let's be thankful for every bite. Let's be generous with what we have. Let's aim that our meals display the qualities of the banquet to which Jesus invites us. And let's marvel together at the God who gives everything to us, satisfying stomachs, souls, and all.